In the gray hush at the edge of the forest, something gold blinked up out of the dirt. Wren stopped breathing. She was 11, and she had spent every one of those years learning how to go unnoticed, to take up no space, to leave no trace. Nobody at the house ever looked twice at the quiet girl in the coat with the missing button. So she had come out here, to the trees they told her never to enter, because the forest was the one thing that never asked her to be smaller than she was. And now the forest was offering her something. She knelt, brushed away the wet leaves. It was a coin. Old, heavy, warm with that strange weight that cheap things never have. On its face, pressed deep into the metal, a small bird with its wings flung open, mid-flight, like it was trying to lift off the gold and into the cold air. 4 steps deeper in, half swallowed by the earth, another one glinted. Then another, a line of them, spaced too evenly to be an accident, pointing somewhere into the dark between the trees. Someone had put these here, on purpose, and every single one was leading straight to her. The morning the girl turned 11, the house smelled of burnt toast and cold radiators. Nobody mentioned the day. There was no card propped against her glass, no candle, no small wrapped thing waiting by her plate. Just the long wooden table, scarred by years of other children's elbows, and the gray light coming through the window like it wasn't sure it wanted to be there at all. Wren sat at the end, where she sat most mornings. The end was a good place. The end was where a quiet girl could eat her oatmeal and watch everything without being watched back. She ate slowly. She always did. Around her, the house woke up the way it usually woke up, loud and careless and full of other people's noise. Chairs scraping, a spoon banging a bowl. 2 of the older girls laughing about something near the stove, their heads tipped together, their voices bright in that way that made the room feel smaller for everyone outside it. Wren wasn't outside it on purpose. She had simply learned, somewhere along the years, that the safest thing a person could be was unnoticed. If you took up no room, no one could ask you to leave it. If you made no sound, no one could tell you to be quiet. So she had become very good at being a shadow at the end of a table. She finished her oatmeal. She drank the last of her water. Then she carried her bowl to the sink and washed it without being asked, with the quiet care she brought to small things, scrubbing it clean and setting it in the rack so that by the time she walked away, there was almost no proof she had been there at all. That was the trick of it. Leave nothing behind. Then no one comes looking. The woman who ran the house didn't look up as Wren passed. She had a clipboard in one hand and a phone pressed between her ear and her shoulder, and her voice had that tired, flattened sound it got when there were too many children and too few hours, and not enough of anything to go around. She was not unkind, that woman. She was simply stretched too thin to be kind in the way a child needs. There's a difference. Wren had learned that too. She pulled her coat off the hook by the back door. It was an old coat, a little too big in the shoulders, with a button missing on the 3rd hole so that it never quite closed all the way across her chest. She had stopped minding the missing button. She had stopped minding a lot of things. She pushed open the back door, and she stepped out into the cold. The house sat at the edge of town, at the edge of everything, really. Behind it, past a strip of weedy grass and a swing set with one seat gone, the land sloped down and the forest began. Big trees, old trees, the kind that had been standing long before the house, long before the town, long before anyone alive could remember. There was a rule about the forest. It wasn't written anywhere. It was the kind of rule that lives in lowered voices and warning looks, the kind that gets passed from one set of careful adults to the next. The woods are no place for children, they said. There are holes you can fall into. There are animals. There's no path. And once you're turned around, there's no easy way back. Wren had heard the warning when she first came to the house years ago. A small girl carrying everything she owned in a paper bag. She had believed it then, for a while, but the rule had a crack in it, and Wren had found the crack the way quiet children find most things. By paying attention when no one thought she was. The danger, she had decided, was deep in the forest. The dark middle of it, the far places where the light gave out. The edge was different. The edge was just trees and roots, and the soft brown smell of old leaves. The edge couldn't hurt anybody, and so the edge had become hers. It was the one piece of the world that didn't belong to anyone else first. No older girl had claimed it. No grown-up had assigned it. It was simply there, waiting, indifferent in the gentlest way. And Wren had slipped into it like a hand into a worn glove. She went there when the house grew too heavy, when the laughter near the stove had a sharp edge under it, when the woman with the clipboard had one of her long gray days, and the whole building seemed to hold its breath. Wren would walk to where the grass ended and the roots began, and she would sit on a thick root that had pushed up out of the ground like a knuckle, and she would listen to the wind moving high in the branches, to a bird she couldn't see, to the enormous, patient quiet of something far older than her loneliness. And for a little while, she would feel like the world was big enough to hold her without minding that she was small. That was where she went on the morning of her birthday. Not to cry. She wasn't a girl who cried easily anymore. Tears, she had found, were just one more thing that asked the world to notice, and the world had taught her not to ask. She went to the edge of the trees because it was the one place the day could be hers. 11 years old. The cold biting at her ears. The forest breathing slow around her. And that was when she saw it. A flicker of gold in the dirt. Just a glint, small and quick, like a fish turning over in shallow water. There, then almost gone. Wren went still. She had a stillness that other children didn't have. A way of freezing without tensing, the way a deer stands at the tree line, deciding. She held that stillness now, and she looked. It came again. A faint gleam, low to the ground, maybe 4 steps inside the line of trees, half tucked into the wet mat of leaves. She stood. She crossed those 4 steps slowly, her boots making almost no sound on the soft ground. And she crouched. It took her a moment to brush the leaves away. They came up dark and cold and clinging, the way leaves do after a frost. And underneath, a coin, not a penny, not anything she had seen before. It was larger than the coins she knew, thicker, heavier looking, even before she touched it. Its surface was dark with age and grime, but along one edge, where something had scraped it long ago, there was a thin line of brightness, a gleam of gold under the grime, like a secret that hadn't been fully buried. Wren picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. That was the first thing. It had a real weight, a dense, settled weight, like it had been made to last 100 years, and meant it. She turned it in her cold fingers. On one face, a bird, wings flung wide, caught in the middle of flight. Every feather pressed deep into the metal by some hand long gone, so deep that the years hadn't worn it smooth. The little bird looked like it was trying to lift right off the gold and rise up into the gray morning air. Wren stared at it. Something in her chest went tight and warm at the same time, and she couldn't have said why. She turned the coin over. On the other side, a pattern of leaves, or maybe vines, worn down softer than the bird, and at the center, a single letter she couldn't quite read, half a shape, the ghost of something that had once been clear. She closed her fingers around it. She looked up into the trees. They stood the way they always stood, silent, tall, giving nothing away. Nothing moved but the wind in the high branches and the slow drift of her own breath. White in the cold, she stayed crouched there for a long moment, the coin warm now from her hand, and she felt the strangest thing. She felt like the coin had been waiting, not lost, not dropped, waiting. It was a silly thought, the kind of thought a younger child might have, and Wren was old in the ways that mattered. She knew coins didn't wait. She knew the world didn't leave gifts for girls like her at the edge of forbidden woods. But the feeling didn't go away just because it was silly. It settled into her, quiet and certain, like a small stone dropped into still water. She slipped the coin into her coat pocket, and she went back inside before the bell rang for the morning's chores. She told no one. That wasn't a decision so much as an instinct. In Wren's experience, the things worth keeping were the things you kept to yourself, the small wonders, the small joys. Say them out loud, and they had a way of being laughed at or taken or made smaller by people who didn't understand what they were worth. So the coin stayed in her pocket. And that night, in the dark, after the breathing of the other children had gone slow and even, she took it out under her blanket and turned it over by feel, tracing the shape of the little bird with the pad of her thumb, again and again, until she fell asleep with it warm in her fist. The second coin appeared 4 days later. Same place, a little deeper in. This one was harder to free. It had worked its way down into the soil, and she had to dig with her fingernails to lift it, getting black earth packed under each nail. But it was the same kind of coin. Same size, same weight, same thin gleam of gold along the scraped edge. The face was different, though. Where the first had a bird, this one had a house. A tall, narrow house with a pointed roof, ringed by trees, or maybe mountains. The detail was finer than anything she had ever held. Someone had cared about that little house. Someone had pressed it into the metal with real attention, the way you draw something you love. Wren stood holding both coins side by side. Her breath came out in a slow cloud, and a thought arrived, quiet and clear. 2 coins, the same kind, a few feet apart. Both of them half buried, neither one scattered the way pocket change scatters when a person trips and spills it. Not dropped, placed. That word sat down in her mind and didn't leave. Placed. She didn't understand it yet, but she felt the shape of it, the way you feel the edge of a step in the dark before you've seen it. She went back the next day, and the next, and the day after that. She got careful about it. She learned the rhythms of the house when the woman with the clipboard was buried in her papers, when the older girls were upstairs and the kitchen was empty. She would slip out the back door and cross the dead grass and step into the trees, and she would search the ground with the slow, patient attention of a girl who had been given very little and had learned to notice every small thing she had. And the forest kept giving. A coin on the 5th day, 2 more on the 6th, then nothing for 3 days. A stretch of cold afternoons spent searching with empty pockets until she found one caught up in the roots of a great old oak, pressed into the wood so tightly that the bark had grown around its edge over years and years, holding it there like the tree had decided to keep it. Each coin she found, she added to a knotted handkerchief she had pulled from a box of lost and found things. She kept the handkerchief under a loose board beneath her bed, alongside the 2 things she owned that mattered most. A photograph of her grandmother, soft at the corners from being held, and a letter read so many times the folds had gone thin as tissue. The coins grew. 6, then 9, then a dozen. And she began to notice something else. They weren't scattered just anywhere. They made a line, not a straight one, not a neat one. The gaps between them shifted, a few feet here, 20 or 30 feet there, but a line all the same. It ran from the edge of the property, out past her route, deeper into the trees, always bending the same way, always angling off toward the same far corner of the woods. She couldn't see where it was going. The forest swallowed the path after a certain point, the trees closing in, and the light giving out, and whatever lay at the end of it stayed hidden behind all that green-gray dark. But there was a line, and lines, Wren knew, were drawn by somebody. It was the cook who saw her first, a stout woman with quick eyes and a habit of saying whatever crossed her mind, the way some people drop lit matches without thinking about what might catch. She came out the back of the house one dim evening, looking for something, and found Wren crouched at the tree line, squinting at the ground in the failing light. "What on earth are you doing out there?" the woman called, her voice loud and startled. "Crawling around in the dirt like that. Get inside." She laughed as she said it. Not a cruel laugh. Just the easy, careless laugh of a grown-up who finds a strange child funny. But laughter carries, and by the next morning, the older girls had it. They were good at this, the older girls. They had built a small kingdom out of the house's hierarchy, and a quiet girl digging in the dirt was exactly the kind of thing that kingdom ran on. "There she goes," one of them said, loud enough to be heard, when Wren came through the common room. "The digger." The others laughed. "Find any treasure yet?" the tallest one called out. Her name was Dana, and she had the kind of face that could be pretty or sharp depending on what she chose, and lately she had been choosing sharp. What's she even looking for out there? Worms, probably. Maybe she's burying something. Maybe she's burying herself. That one got the biggest laugh. Wren walked past them with her chin level and her eyes forward. She didn't answer. Answering only ever made it worse. She had learned that too. The trick was to give them nothing, to be a smooth stone they couldn't get a grip on, and after a while they would grow bored and roll on to something else. But it stung. She wouldn't have admitted it. Not to them, not to anyone. But it stung in the small, private place where she kept the things that hurt. Because they had it wrong. They thought she was digging for nothing. They thought she was a sad little girl pawing at the dirt because she had nothing real to hold. And maybe a year ago, that wouldn't have been so far from the truth. But it wasn't the truth now. Now she had 14 coins knotted into a handkerchief under a loose board. Now she had a line drawn through a forest by a hand she couldn't see. Now she had a secret so large it made the laughter feel small. That night, she took the handkerchief out and untied it and laid the coins across her blanket in the dark. 14 of them. She put them in order, the order she had found them, tracing the path they made. The bird, the house, the tall tree, a gate, a woman's face in profile, a river, a hand holding something that might have been a key. Each coin different. Each one its own small picture. And along the edge of every single one, worn but still there, the same string of marks, the same row of little symbols, like a number that tied them all together. A set. The word came to her from a book she had read. She had carried one of the coins, weeks earlier, to the small library in town, and she had pulled a heavy book off a low shelf and paged through it at a corner table, comparing the pictures inside to the gold in her palm. She hadn't found a perfect match, but she had found something close, a chapter about coins that families used to have made, long ago in small numbers, for their own private use. Coins that weren't meant to be spent in ordinary stores. Coins made as tokens, as markers, as quiet signs of who a family was. The book had said something else too. Something Wren had read twice, slowly, to be sure she understood it. That coins like these were worth the most when they were part of a complete set. A complete set. She had counted, sitting at that library table. She had thought about the bird, the house, the tree, the gate, the face, the river, the key. And she had understood, in a slow, dawning way, that she was finding pieces of something. Pieces meant to be found together. And the trail was leading her, one coin at a time, toward the rest. She had put the book back on the shelf without checking it out. No record, no name on a card, nothing for anyone to notice. And she had walked home through the quiet town with the coin warm in her pocket and a strange new weight in her chest that had nothing to do with gold. The librarian had watched her that day. An older woman with half-moon glasses and soft eyes and a sweater the color of oatmeal. She hadn't said anything. She had simply watched Wren carry the heavy book to the table and watched her bend over it with that fierce, quiet attention, and something in the woman's face had gone gentle and thoughtful. She hadn't asked what the girl was looking for, but she had seen the coin. Just a glimpse of it, gold in a small hand. And she had not forgotten. Her name was Opal, but Wren didn't know yet how much that would come to matter. The teasing settled into the days like weather. The digger, the treasure hunter, the exaggerated searching when she walked into a room, hands shading eyes, peering at the floor. One of the younger boys learned to make a sound when she passed. Some silly noise he thought was funny, copying the older girls in hopes they'd let him belong. Wren let it roll off. Mostly. She had her route, and her edge of the woods, and her 14 coins, and her line through the trees. She had a thing that was hers, and a girl who has even one thing that is truly hers can carry a great deal. The week after she found the first coins, something shifted. She had been treating the line like a happy accident, a string of small luck. But the longer she studied it, the less it looked like luck. The gaps were uneven, yes, but they were uneven on purpose. That was what she finally understood, lying awake one night with the coins laid out in the dark. If someone had simply spilled coins, they'd fall in a clump. If someone had thrown them, they'd scatter wide. But these were spaced like steps, like footprints, close together where the way was easy, farther apart where the trees thinned and a walker could see ahead. As if whoever placed them had known that a person following would need to work for the next one, would have to look, would have to want it. As if the trail had been made to test whoever came after, to see if they were patient enough, to see if they were the kind of person who paid attention. Wren lay very still in the dark, and a thought moved through her, slow and enormous. What if it had been made for someone? Not for her, exactly. She wasn't foolish enough to think the world had set a trap of gold just for a quiet orphan girl. But for someone, a finder, whoever was stubborn enough and quiet enough and watchful enough to walk into the forbidden woods and look down and keep looking. The thought frightened her a little, but mostly it thrilled her, because in all her short life, no one had ever made anything for her to find. No one had left a trail and trusted that the right person would follow it. And here, maybe, was a trail. She decided she would follow it further. Not to the edge anymore. Past the edge. Past the second line of trees. And the third. Deeper than she had let herself go. Deeper than she had told a single soul. She picked a gray, still morning to do it. She made herself a sandwich while the kitchen was empty and slid it into a canvas bag she found by the back door, the kind no one would miss. She added a small flashlight and a bottle of water and the handkerchief of coins and a folded scrap of paper on which she had drawn, as best she could, a rough map of every place she'd found a coin. The gaps, the angles, the slow bend of the line toward the far corner of the woods. She pulled on her coat with the missing button, and she stepped out into the cold while the house was still half asleep. The forest took her in the way it always did, without welcome, without warning, simply continuing to be exactly what it was, while one small girl walked into it. The light was pale and thin. The ground was soft from the night's frost letting go. She moved carefully, but not slowly, her eyes down, following the line she had memorized, and the forest closed around her step by step until the house behind her was gone from sight. She found the next coin 20 minutes in, and 2 more within the hour, past the place she had always turned back. And here, past that place, the forest began to change. The trees grew older, bigger, spaced farther apart, like they'd had room to spread and had taken it. The tangled underbrush thinned out and gave way to moss, thick green moss that held the cold and swallowed the sound of her boots, so that she moved through the world without making any noise at all. The light shifted, too, less green now, more silver. It came down through the high branches in long, dusty columns, and the air seemed to shimmer faintly in them, and the whole forest had gone hushed and private, like a room with the door pulled shut. Wren stopped. Ahead of her, half sunk in the moss, something pale caught the silver light. Not a coin. Something bigger. She crossed to it and knelt and brushed away the soft green growth with her cold fingers, and found stone. Not a rock. Not a boulder shaped by weather and time. A stone that had been cut. A block of pale gray granite, shaped by hands, square-edged and deliberate, about as high as her knee, half buried and furred with moss along its sides. And it wasn't alone. She brushed away more moss, and there was another behind it. Then another. A line of them. Cut stones, set into the earth, spaced a few feet apart, running parallel to the trail of coins, marching off into the trees in the same slow, bending direction, as far as she could see before the forest closed the view. A word arrived in her mind before she had reasoned her way to it. Markers. They were markers. Someone had cut these stones and carried them out here, deep into a forest where almost no one came, and set them into the ground in a careful line. Not a wall, not a fence. A path made to be followed. And tucked into the crack between the first stone and the cold earth, half hidden, a glint of gold. Another coin. Wren sat back on her heels in the silver light, surrounded by the silent stones, the moss cold and damp beneath her, the great old trees standing watch. And she understood, finally, all the way down. This was not an accident. This was not luck. The coins, the careful spacing, the cut stones running off into the deep woods. Someone had done this. Someone had stood in this very forest long before she was born and laid down a trail of gold and granite, patient and deliberate and full of trust. A trail that pointed somewhere. A trail that had been waiting through how many cold winters for the right person to come along and follow it to the end. And of all the people in the world, of all the careless, hurried, looking past people who had walked the edge of these woods and seen nothing, it was a quiet girl in a coat with a missing button who had stopped, who had looked down, who had kept looking. Wren got to her feet. She looked back once, the way she had come, toward the house she couldn't see anymore, toward the table where no one had remembered, toward the laughter and the small daily reminders that she was nobody's first thought. Then she turned and faced the line of stones. They led deeper, into the silver and the moss and the hush, into the part of the forest she had been told to fear. She stood there a long moment at the threshold of it, her heart doing something loud and steady in her chest, the canvas bag heavy on her shoulder, the handkerchief of coins warm against her side. She was 11 years old. She had a trail no one else had found, and somewhere at the end of it, past the stones, past the dark, something was waiting. She took a breath, and she stepped past the first marker into the deep woods and followed the line. The stones led her on. One by one, they rose up out of the moss, pale and patient, each a few steps past the last, each pointing the same way. Wren followed them the way a person follows a thread through a dark house, not knowing where it ends, only trusting that it ends somewhere. The forest grew stranger as she walked, stiller. The trees here were enormous, their trunks wider than her arms could ever reach around, their roots buckling the ground into slow green waves. Almost no birds, almost no wind, just the hush of a place that had been left to itself for a long, long while. And the soft press of her boots into the moss. Time stopped meaning much. There were no bells out here, no voices calling her in. The only clock was the slow tilt of the silver light through the branches, and Wren had learned to read that kind of clock better than most. She found coins along the way, not beside every stone, tucked here and there in the leaves, in the cracks of roots, half swallowed by the earth. She gathered them as she went, her fingers gone numb with cold, until the handkerchief at her side grew heavy. And then the trees opened. The stones ended at the edge of a clearing. Wren stopped at the tree line and stood very still. The clearing was round, more or less, wide, ringed by the great old trees like a held breath, and at its center stood the bones of something that had been built by human hands. Not a ruin, exactly. That word felt too broken for what she was looking at. It was more like something that had simply been allowed to wait. A foundation of cut stone rose up out of the ground on every side, knee-high, solid, square. Whatever had stood upon it once was gone now, fallen inward, its old timbers long since rotted down into a low tangle of wood and creeping green. But the foundation held. The stones it was made of were huge, fitted together so cleanly that all the years had failed to pry them apart. Thick vines had climbed the outer walls. Tall grass had taken the floor inside. But the shape of the thing was unmistakable. Someone had built something here, something meant to last. Wren stepped out of the trees and into the clearing. The ground felt different under her boots, firmer, as though the earth here had been packed and leveled by someone a long time ago, and had held its shape even as the forest crept back in. The grass that grew across it was finer than the grass outside, shorter, the kind that comes up where soil was once disturbed and then left in peace for a great while. And in the low silver light, at just the right angle, she could see something faint in the way the grass grew. Lines, pale ghosts of paths. One ran from where she stood, straight to the nearest wall of the foundation. Another crossed it, running along the longer side. They were almost gone, those paths, smoothed over by years of patient grass. But they were there. Someone had walked them once. Walked them so many times that the ground still held the memory of their feet. Wren's heart was doing something quiet and enormous in her chest. Near the far edge of the clearing, swallowed by the roots of an oak whose trunk was wider than she was tall, something pale stood upright. A post. A stone post. She crossed to it slowly, and brushed away the moss and the dead vine that clung to its face. And underneath, carved deep into the granite, cut so cleanly that all the seasons had failed to soften it, was a word, a name. Hale she traced the letters with one cold finger. H-A-L-E. She said it once, softly, into the hush of the clearing. Hale. The forest gave her nothing back, but the cuts in the stone were deep and sure, made by someone who had wanted them to be read for a very long time. This wasn't a name scratched in a hurry. This was care. This was a craftsman, working slowly, meaning every stroke. Someone had wanted this name to last. Someone had wanted it to be found. Wren walked the edge of the foundation, running her hand along the cold, lichen-spotted stone. And at the far end, set into the wall, she found a gap. Not a doorway, quite. The frame of one. The door itself was long gone, but the cut stone frame remained. And below the place where a threshold had been, stone steps led down into the dark. Wren stood at the top of those steps for a long moment. She thought about the rule. The woods are no place for children. There are holes you can fall into. She thought about every voice that had ever told her to be smaller, to stay back, to leave things alone. And then she reached into her bag and clicked on the flashlight. The beam fell down the steps. Stone. Steep. Maybe 8 of them, ending in a low, dark space below the level of the ground. She didn't let herself think too long. If she thought too long, she might turn back. So she went down. The room at the bottom was small, square. Its walls were fitted stone, and the air was dry. That was the thing that stopped her. She had braced for damp, for the wet, rotting smell of anything underground. But this room was cool and dry and still, and it carried only the faint, clean smell of old stone. No mildew, no rot, no water stains creeping up the walls. Someone had built this place to keep things safe. Not just hidden. Safe. She pressed a hand flat against the nearest wall. The stone was solid, unmoved, set so carefully that all the long years had failed to shift a single block. Wren turned the flashlight slowly across the room. 3 of the walls were bare, just stone, and here and there a thin, pale root reaching through a crack, searching, finding only dark and dry air. But the fourth wall had a shelf, built right into the stone, 3 tiers of it. And on the shelf, things waited. Her breath caught. She moved the beam along them, slow, her heart loud in her ears. Wooden boxes, a dozen, maybe more. Dark with age, their lids fitted tight. Some with clasps gone red with rust. Some sealed with old wax cracked into little maps. Beside them, glass jars. Large ones with metal lids, their contents lost behind dark, dusty glass. And on the lowest shelf, sitting alone, a leather case. The kind that might hold papers, drawings, something a person wanted kept. Its leather had gone dark and stiff with the years, but its stitching held. Wren stood very still. She was a small girl, alone, in a room that had been sealed away from the world for longer than she had been alive. The forest was silent above her. The house was miles behind her. No one in the world knew where she was. And yet, she wasn't afraid. That was the strange thing. She felt something more like the hush you feel in a place where someone is sleeping. A sense that she had stepped into something that did not want to harm her. Something that had been waiting, the way she had felt the very first coin was waiting. She reached out and touched the nearest box. The wood was dense and cold under her fingers. She tried the clasp, rusted shut. She tried the next, the same. The third one moved, slow and stiff, the rust grinding as she worked it. On the 4th try, it gave. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a lining of cloth gone soft and brown with age, lay coins. The same coins. The ones she had been following through the forest. Dozens of them, packed in neat rows, their surfaces dark, but the gold gleaming through wherever the light touched. She picked one up. It was cleaner than the ones from the leaves, less worn. And on its face the little bird was sharper, every feather crisp, looking even more like it might lift off into the air. She turned it over. The narrow house, the pointed roof, and below it, in letters so small she had to bring it close to the beam, 2 words, Hale House. Wren set the coin down carefully. Her hands had begun to shake. Just a little. She couldn't have said if it was the cold, or the wonder, or the strange feeling of standing at the edge of something far too large for an 11-year-old to hold. She closed the box, and she turned to the leather case. It opened with a soft creak, the old leather protesting after its long stillness. Inside, papers. Old paper, stiff at the edges, covered in handwriting that was dense and careful and faded in places to the color of weak tea. She lifted the top sheet. It crackled under her fingers, as if waking from a long sleep. She held the flashlight close and read. The words were strange, old-fashioned, the kind of language that explained itself slowly and filled its own gaps with formality. But Wren was a girl who read carefully, who slowed down for things worth understanding, and she worked through it line by line, her lips moving slightly the way they did when she was thinking hard. And the meaning came clear. It was a will, a last wish, written down and signed and meant to stand. It was signed by a woman, Cordelia Hale. Wren read on, the flashlight steady in one hand, the brittle page in the other, and what she read made her go very still, because Cordelia Hale had not left her home, and her land, and all that she had gathered, to a son, not to a daughter, not to a nephew, or a cousin, or any name on any list. She had left it to a finder, to whoever followed the trail to its end, to whoever was patient enough and watchful enough and stubborn enough to walk the line of coins through the forest and reach the place where it began. That person, and no one else, would be the one to inherit everything. Wren lowered the page and sat back on her heels in the dark. She read it again, to be sure, and it said the same thing the second time. Not a person named, not a family chosen. A finder. She thought about the trail, the coins spaced like careful steps, the cut stones running off into the deep woods, the gaps made uneven on purpose, made so that a person would have to look and want it and earn it. A test. The whole trail had been a test. And whoever passed it, whoever reached this room with the coins in hand as proof, would be the one Cordelia Hale had been waiting for. Wren sat in the dry, cool dark in a room that had been sealed for a lifetime, and felt something she had no name for rise up slowly in her chest. She was a girl with a coat that wouldn't button, a girl no one had remembered on her birthday, a girl they called the digger, who ate at the end of the table and left no trace of herself behind. And she had followed the trail to its end. She had the coins. She thought, perhaps, she might be the finder. The thought was too big to look at directly, so she set it down, gently, the way you set down something fragile. And she kept reading. At the bottom of the leather case, wrapped separately in cloth that had held together better than most, she found a small book, a notebook, leather covered, its pages thin but whole. She opened it, and the handwriting was the same as the will, but different too, where the will had been formal, careful, the language of a woman speaking to the future. The notebook was soft, personal, the handwriting of a woman talking to herself, or to someone she trusted completely. Wren read. The words spoke of an old woman in her last years, a house closed up and given over to the forest, a decision made, slowly, with great care, and then a passage that made Wren stop breathing. I cannot know who will come, the old woman had written, and it would be wrong to try. The trail will find the right person, because the right person is the one willing to follow it. The careless will not bother. The hurried will not have the patience. The fearful will turn back at the trees. But the right one will walk in and look down and understand that the gold points to something real, and worth the finding. She read it twice. The old woman had not known her, could not have known her. She had written these words in a forest long before Wren was born, with no idea at all who would one day kneel in this dark room and read them by the thin light of a flashlight. And yet, it felt like she was being spoken to. "The right one will have earned it," the old woman had written, in whatever quiet way such things are earned. Wren pressed her hand flat against her chest, because she knew about earning things in quiet ways. She knew about being patient when no one was watching, about holding on to something inside herself when the world gave her every reason to let go. She knew about paying attention to the small things others walked right past. She had been doing those things her whole short life, and no one had ever told her they were worth anything. Until now. Until a woman she had never met, writing in a notebook a lifetime ago, had described her almost exactly and called it earning. Wren read on, slower now, her eyes blurring once and then clearing. And near the bottom of the case, beneath the last of the papers, her fingers found something small. She drew it out. It was a little bird, not gold, not a coin. A small bird, carved from pale wood, worn smooth by hands, its wings tucked, its head tilted as if it were listening. Wren held it in her palm and stared at it, and the dry room seemed to go very quiet, even quieter than before, because she had seen this bird. She had held one just like it, a small carved bird, smooth from being touched, its head tilted the same gentle way. Her grandmother had kept one on the windowsill. Wren remembered it the way she remembered the smell of lavender and the sound of a thin voice reading aloud in the evenings. Her grandmother had kept that little wooden bird where the light could reach it, and when Wren had asked once where it had come from, her grandmother had smiled in a far-away sort of way. From a kind place, she had said, from long ago, before all this, and she had not said more. Wren turned the carved bird over in her cold fingers. It was the same. The same hand had made it, or one very like it. The same gentle tilt of the head. The same patient little wings. Her grandmother had been here, or near here, long, long ago, in a life Wren knew almost nothing about. Her grandmother's path had touched this place. The old woman in the notebook could not have known that, could not have planned it. She had set her trail for any patient soul who might come, and she had let the forest choose. And the forest had reached back across all those years, and chosen a girl whose own blood had once brushed against this quiet, hidden place. It was not a reason. It was not a claim. It was just a thread, a small, impossible thread, gold as the coins, connecting a lonely old woman, a grandmother gone to lavender and memory, and a girl kneeling in the dark. Wren held the wooden bird against her heart, and for the first time in a long while, she did not feel alone. She did not stay much longer. The light through the steps had changed while she'd been below, gone thinner and more golden, and she knew the day was tilting toward its end. If she was missing at the wrong hour, there would be questions, searches, the kind of attention she could not afford right now. So she packed carefully. She closed the boxes she had opened. She put the papers back into the leather case, all but the notebook, which she wrapped in a spare sock and tucked alongside the will. And the little wooden bird she slipped into her coat pocket, where she could feel it, smooth and certain, against her hand. She left everything else exactly as she had found it. The boxes, the jars she had not yet opened, the dark, dry waiting room. It had held its secrets a lifetime. It could hold them one more night. She climbed the stone steps back up into the clearing, into the gold of the failing light, and she stood for a moment looking back at the foundation and the carved post and the ghost paths in the grass. Then she turned and walked back into the trees and followed her own footprints home. She knew, by the time she reached the edge of the woods, what she had to do. She could not do this alone. That much was clear. Even to a girl of 11, she had a will written in old, careful words she could only half understand. She had coins she could not put a value on. She had a clearing and a hidden room and a thread of fate that tied her grandmother to a stranger's gift. And she had no money, no grown-up she fully trusted, no standing in the world at all. If she walked into the house and handed it all over, it would be taken from her, folded into the slow machinery of careful adults, and lost where she could never reach it again. She knew that the way she knew most hard things, by watching quietly, for a long time, how the world tended to work. She needed someone who would understand what she had found. Someone who could read the old words. Someone who could not be bought, or hurried, or talked into looking away. And as she crossed the dead grass toward the house in the last of the light, a face came to her. The woman at the library. The one with the half-moon glasses and the oatmeal sweater and the soft, watchful eyes. Opal. She had watched Wren carry the heavy book to the table. She had seen the coin. And she had not asked a single question, which somehow meant more than if she had asked 100. She was a woman who had spent a lifetime among old things, among books and papers and the quiet weight of the past. She was a woman who paid attention. Wren slid the leather case under the loose board beneath her bed. She washed the mud from her boots on the back step. She ate supper at the end of the table in her usual silence, while around her the house went on being loud and careless and full of other people's noise. No one had noticed she was gone. No one asked where she had been, and for once she was glad of it, because the invisibility she had carried like a stone all these years was just now a kind of shelter. The next morning, she asked to walk to the library. This was nothing strange. The quiet girl walked to the library often, and the woman with the clipboard waved her off without looking up, the way she waved off most small things. The walk was a long one, down the quiet streets of the small, worn town, past the closed-up storefronts, past the diner with its hand-lettered sign. Wren walked it with the leather case in her bag and the wooden bird in her pocket, and her words arranging themselves carefully in her head. She had learned, somewhere, that the order in which a person says things matters more than the things themselves. That belief is built one careful sentence at a time. The library was warm. It smelled of old paper and the faint, floral hand cream the librarian wore, a smell Wren had come to think of, without quite deciding to, as the smell of safety. Opal was at the desk, sorting a stack of returns with the quick, easy hands of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She looked up when the door opened. She gave Wren the same small nod she gave the regulars. Wren walked to the table at the back, away from the few others scattered through the room, and she sat. And she waited. After a little while, Opal came down the aisle between the shelves, a book in her hand to return to its place. She slid it home. She turned to go. And then her eyes found Wren's table. Wren met them. She did not say anything. She set the leather case on the table between them, and she laid her hand flat on top of it. Opal stood very still. Then she came and sat down in the chair across the table and folded her hands and looked at the girl. "You found something," Opal said. It was not a question. Wren nodded. Opal looked at the case. "May I?" Wren pushed it across. The old woman handled it the way a person handles something they recognize as precious. She examined the leather, the stitching, the clasp. Then she opened it and drew out the will and unfolded it and bent her head and read. She read the way Wren had read, slowly, without rushing, her eyes moving carefully down each line. And when she reached the end, she did a thing that made Wren's heart climb into her throat. She went back. She read 2 passages a second time. Then she set the papers down on the table and folded her hands on top of them and looked at Wren with an expression the girl had not often seen aimed at her in all her years. She looked at her like she mattered. "Where did you find this?" Opal asked softly. And so Wren told her. She told her in the order she had decided on the night before, lying awake under her thin blanket. The first coin, the line through the trees, the cut stones, the clearing, the carved name, the steps down into the dark, the dry room and the shelf, and the boxes, and the case. She did not rush. She did not perform anything she did not feel. She spoke in the same, even, careful voice she used for everything. The voice that some called strange and some called too quiet for a child. And that was, for Wren, simply the only way she knew how to be. Opal listened without once breaking in. And when Wren finished, there was a silence of perhaps 10 seconds, in which the warm library went on being itself around them. A page turning somewhere, the soft hum of the heat, the shelves standing in their patient rows. "You walked into those woods alone," Opal said at last. It was not quite a scolding, but it was not quite not one either. "There was something there that needed finding," Wren said. "I needed to know what it was before I told anyone. If I had told them first, it would have been taken, folded away, lost." Opal looked at her for a long moment. "That may still happen," she said gently. "I know." Wren's voice didn't waver. "But not yet. Not until we understand what it is." The words slipped out before she had decided to say it, and she felt it land in the space between them. She watched Opal hear it, watched something in the old woman's face shift, soften and steady at the same time. Opal looked down at the will. She turned it over and studied the marks on the back, the careful seals and signatures of people long gone. "This is real," she said quietly. Not to Wren, almost to the paper itself. "This is a true and careful thing. The hand, the words, the way the paper has aged. This was made by someone who meant every line of it." She looked up. "Cordelia Hale," she said slowly. "There were Hales in this valley once, a long time ago. A family that held a great deal of land, and then, the story goes, faded away. Faded out of memory, the way old families do. People said the last of them died with no one left to inherit." She paused. "But she didn't leave it to no one," Opal said. "She left it to a finder." Wren reached into her pocket. She drew out the small wooden bird and set it on the table beside the will. There's this too, she said. Opal picked it up, turned it in the light, and something crossed her face that Wren couldn't name. My grandmother had one, Wren said. The same. She kept it on the windowsill. She said it came from a kind place, long ago, before all this. Opal held the little bird very gently. Then, perhaps, she said after a while, your grandmother walked a corner of these woods herself, once, before you were born, before any of this. She set the bird down with care. The woman who left this trail couldn't have known that, Opal went on, almost to herself. She couldn't have known who would come. And yet, here you are, with your grandmother's bird in your pocket and her coins in your bag. She shook her head slowly. Some things find their way home, child, even when no one alive remembers the way. Wren felt her eyes sting. She blinked it back, but she did not look away. For the first time in longer than she could hold in her hands, someone had looked at her and heard her and believed every word. Opal reached into the pocket of her sweater and drew out a small notepad and a pen. There are things we'll need to do, she said, carefully and quietly. There may be those who would not want a girl from that house claiming a thing like this, but we won't think about them yet. She uncapped the pen. First, we understand what you've found, properly, together. Wren held that word like the wooden bird, smooth, solid, hers. Opal began to write, and it was Wren, watching the old woman's bent head, who happened to glance up, toward the front of the library, toward the window that looked out on the quiet street. A car had stopped at the curb. Not parked, stopped, idling. A pale, plain sedan, the kind that wouldn't catch the eye of most people. But Wren was not most people. Wren noticed things. And what she noticed now was that the car had been sitting there since before she arrived, that no one had gotten out, that the figure behind the wheel was simply watching the library, or watching her. Wren's hand drifted to her pocket and closed around the little wooden bird. She did not say anything yet, but a cold thread of certainty wound its way through her chest, quiet and clear as the trail itself had been. Someone else knew. Someone had been watching these woods, this town, this story, waiting for the day a finder would finally come. And that day was today. The pale sedan was gone by the time the girl stepped out of the library, but the cold thread it had left behind in her chest did not leave with it. Opal had seen the car too. Wren knew it because the old woman's hands had gone still over her little notepad just for a heartbeat, and her soft eyes had cut to the window and held there a moment too long before she turned back to the table. Neither of them said much about it. Not then. There are things you do not name out loud, for fear of making them more real. But something had shifted in that warm, paper-smelling room. The story was no longer only Wren's to carry. Someone else had leaned in to listen now, and somewhere out there, in a plain car at a quiet curb, someone else had been listening for a very long time. The first true warning came 3 days later, and it came the way most hard things had always come to a girl like her. Sideways, half heard, through a door left open a crack, and a voice lowered just a little less than it should have been. The woman who ran the house was on the telephone in the small office off the hall, and Wren, passing by with a stack of folded towels held warm against her chest, caught a handful of words that stopped her in the corridor as surely as a hand laid flat on her shoulder. All this sudden interest all at once. People asking about old papers. Best she be moved somewhere else, somewhere quieter, until it settles. A pause. The hum of a voice on the other end. Soon. Within the week, they're telling me. Within the week. Wren stood very still in the dim hallway, the towels warm against her, and let the words settle into place one by one. Moved somewhere else, soon, within the week. She did not understand the whole shape of it. She was a girl of 11, and the great slow machinery of grown-up decisions was a thing she could see only the edges of, the way you see the edge of deep water and guess at how far down it goes. But she understood enough. Someone wanted her gone. Gone from this house. Gone from these woods. Gone from the trail and the clearing and the dry stone room with its shelves and its waiting jars. Gone from the one corner of the whole wide world that had finally pointed toward her instead of past her. And whoever wanted it fast. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere in the long quiet of her years, that crying was a current. It swept your feet out from under you when you most needed to stand. And right now, she needed her feet under her, square and sure. So she carried the towels the rest of the way down the hall. She stacked them in the closet, edges squared, with her usual quiet care. And then she walked to the back door and pulled on her coat with the missing button and slipped out into the gray afternoon to think. The forest took her in the way it had taken her every time, without questions, without conditions. She did not go far. She sat on her root, the gnarled one that pushed up out of the ground like a knuckle, and she drew the little wooden bird from her pocket and turned it over slowly in her cold fingers. And she let her mind move, careful and patient, over everything she knew. Whoever sat behind the wheel of that pale car, whoever lay behind the sudden interest and the careful voice on the telephone, they were not finished. That much was plain. And they had more power than she did. That was plain too. A girl with a missing button and a knotted handkerchief of coins against people with smooth voices and the standing to make a child disappear into somewhere quieter. It should have frightened her more than it did. But there was a thing those people did not have. They did not have the coins. They did not have the trail. And Wren was beginning to suspect there was something further still. Something she had glimpsed and not yet reached. She thought about the glass jars on the shelf in the dry stone room, the ones she had left unopened, dark and patient in the cold. And she thought of a line from the old woman's notebook, a line she had not understood at the time. What is deepest is kept deepest. She had taken it then for the wandering thought of an old woman near the close of a long life. Now she turned it over in her mind, like the wooden bird in her hand. Now she wondered if it had been a direction all along. She went back the next morning, while the house was still half asleep. Opal had wanted to come, but the old woman could not move through a forest the way a small girl could. Quick and low over the moss, slipping between the great trunks without a sound. And so they had agreed, carefully, in the back of the library, in voices that barely carried past the shelves, that Wren would go alone this once, only to look, only to find what the jars were keeping, and then to come straight back. So she went, down the trail she knew by heart now, past the markers rising pale from the moss, into the clearing, gone silver under a low and clouded sky, down the stone steps, into the cool, dry dark. The room waited exactly as she had left it. That stillness again. That sense of something sleeping, undisturbed. She went to the shelf and lifted down the first of the glass jars and worked the stiff metal lid until, with a small dry crack, it gave. Inside, rolled papers, kept dry by the glass through all the long, patient years. She drew them out and spread them on the cold stone floor, weighting the curling edges down with coins. They were maps, hand-drawn, careful, the work of the same patient hand that had written the will and filled the little notebook. Maps of the land, the buildings, the paths that once ran bright through the forest, the borders of something that had been once far larger than a fallen house and a ring of trees. And there, on one of them, in faded ink, Wren found the clearing she knelt in, marked with a small, careful word. And beyond it, deeper into the woods, a fine line led off to another mark entirely. A square, drawn dark and sure and deliberate. And beside it, in the old woman's hand, 2 words. The deep room. Wren's breath caught in the cold air. There was another place, deeper than the clearing, deeper than the dry stone room, deeper than anything she had found. The notebook had not been wandering. It had been telling her the truth. What is deepest is kept deepest. She traced the line on the map with one fingertip, fixing it into her memory. The bend of it, the slow angle deeper into the trees, the careful distances. She had a mind that held shapes and numbers the way other minds held faces and songs. And she let this one sink down into her, sure and clear and unforgettable. Then she rolled the map gently and tucked it into her bag. She did not go to the deep room that morning. She had promised Opal only to look. And besides, a thing like that was not a thing to walk into alone. That night, Opal brought someone. She had spoken of her once before in the careful low voice they used now. A woman she had known a long while. A woman who had spent a lifetime among old papers and careful matters, and who, Opal said, was not easily frightened, could not be hurried, and would not look away from a hard thing simply because it was hard. Her name was Eleanor. She was older even than Opal, small and sharp-shouldered, with white hair cut close to her head and eyes that moved quickly and then settled, hard and certain, on whatever they had chosen to study. When she met Wren, she did not soften her voice the way grown-ups so often did with children from that house. She did not look at the girl with that particular careful sorrow, as though already apologizing for a small, sad life she had imagined. She looked at Wren the way she might look at a thing she meant fully to understand, directly, plainly, without a drop of pity. "You found a trail," Eleanor said, "and you followed it to the end." "Not the end," Wren said. "There's a deeper place, and I have the way to it." Eleanor's eyes flicked to Opal, then back to the child. And something in the hard old face moved, just slightly. A flicker of something that, on a warmer face, might have been respect. "Then we go carefully," Eleanor said. "And we go soon. Because the people who want you gone are not patient people. And patience is the one thing they ought to have learned all these years, and plainly did not." They went that very night, the 3 of them. It was a cold, clear dark, with the stars scattered hard and bright between the bare branches. The kind of stars that look closer than they are, as though you might reach up and gather a handful. Wren led. Her feet found the way by memory more than by sight, the narrow beam of the flashlight carving a path through the trees. Opal came behind her, slow but steady, her breath clouding white in the cold. And Eleanor came last of all, saying little, missing nothing, her small, sharp figure moving through the dark with a sureness that belied her years. They passed the clearing without stopping. They went by the fallen house, by the carved post with its single deep-cut name, and on, deeper, where the ground began to slope away beneath them, where the trees grew older and the dark grew thicker and the great silence pressed close on every side. Wren counted her steps the way the map had taught her. The bend, the angle, the distance, and at last, in a low hollow below a ridge, where the fallen leaves lay deep and undisturbed by any foot in years beyond counting, her boot struck something solid just beneath the surface. She knelt. She brushed the leaves away with both hands, the cold biting into her fingers. And the flashlight found iron. Not natural iron. Not some buried stone with a metal vein. Worked iron, shaped and bolted and set flush into the very floor of the forest. A door, lying flat in the ground, hinged along one side, and set into the other, something heavy and round and complex. A door built into the earth itself, hidden beneath the slow gathering of years, waiting. Eleanor knelt beside her and studied it for a long, quiet moment. This was made by someone who understood the difference, she said softly, between keeping a thing safe and keeping it hidden. This is both at once. Whoever built it meant for it to wait, and meant for it to open one day, for the right hands. Wren brushed away the last of the leaves from the great round lock, and then she went very still, because it was not a keyhole. The lock was a wide face of dark metal, broader than her two small hands laid side by side, and set into it, arranged in a ring, were holes. Not one, many, each one a different shape, each one. She leaned closer, and her heart began, slowly, to climb, each one the size and the shape of a coin. She counted them. Her lips moved in the cold and the dark, and when she reached the last one, she sat back on her heels, and a sound came out of her that was half a laugh and half something that had no name at all. The number of holes in that lock was the number of coins in her handkerchief. Exactly. Not one more, not one less. She opened the handkerchief with fingers that shook now, not from the cold. She spread the coins on the leaves in the flashlight's narrow beam, and she looked from the gold to the lock and back again. And slowly, slowly, the whole truth of it bloomed in her chest like warmth flooding back into frozen hands. The bird-shaped hole, the house-shaped hole, the tree, the gate, the river, the key. Each hole had been cut for one coin, and one only. The old woman had not simply scattered a trail of gold through the ground for someone to gather. She had built this door to open for one kind of person, and one kind only. The person who had walked the whole of the trail, who had been patient enough to find every piece, who had carried them, all of them, here to the deepest place, the finder. The coins were not only proof, the coins were the key. Eleanor made a low sound in her throat. Opal said nothing at all, only held the flashlight steady, her hand trembling just slightly, her eyes shining wet and bright in the dark. And Wren began to fit the coins into the lock. She worked slowly, carefully, with the same deep attention she gave anything that mattered. The bird coin into the bird-shaped hole. A small resistance, then a soft turn, and it seated home with a quiet, certain click. The house coin into the house-shaped hole, the tree, the gate, the river. One by the thin light of a flashlight, in the cold and the dark and the vast hush of the deep woods, a girl who had been laughed at, a girl they had called the digger, fit each piece of gold into the place that had waited a lifetime to receive it. Her hands did not shake now. A great stillness had come over her, the deep, settled stillness of something arriving, at long last, exactly where it had always belonged. The last coin slid home, and turned. For a moment, nothing at all, just the cold and the dark, and the held breath of 3 people kneeling in the leaves. Then, from somewhere deep within the door, came a sound, a low, grinding shift, like a great stone turning over slowly in its sleep. A pause, and then a long, slow exhalation. The sigh of air that had been sealed away from the living world for a lifetime, escaping all at once, cold and clean against their faces. The edge of the door rose, just slightly, the old grip of the seal breaking at last, after all the silent years. Eleanor and Wren took hold of opposite sides, and together they lifted, and the deep room opened beneath them. It was lined in metal. Bright panels, dulled with the years but unbroken, bolted over fitted stone. The air that rose up out of it was cold and bone-dry, kept whole and clean by that heavy door through how many turning seasons no one alive could say. Their 3 lights moved across the inside, and for a long moment not one of them spoke. Shelves lined 3 of the walls, floor to ceiling, packed close with sealed metal cases, each one labeled in the old woman's careful, patient hand, a small tag fixed to the front of every one. And at the far end of the room, set apart from all the rest, on a shelf entirely its own, a single case, and on it, in that same handwriting, Wren had come to know like the lines of a familiar face, 3 words, for the finder. Eleanor moved through the room with a slow, sure thoroughness, opening case after case, her practiced old eyes taking in what lay within, her face growing more and more carefully still with each lid she lifted. What the cases held, Wren did not fully understand that night. She understood only that it was a great deal, more than she had any pictures for, more than her small, narrow life had ever held the words to measure. She understood it the way a child understands the sea on first seeing it, not the size of the thing, only that it is vast, that it stretches on, past where the eye can follow. But Wren did not go to the riches. She crossed the cold metal room, past the gleam of all that the cases held, to the single case set apart at the far end. And she lifted it down with both hands, the way you lift something you already know to be precious. For the finder. She broke the old seal, and inside, kept whole and dry through all the long dark, was a letter. She unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled, waking after its long sleep, and by the light of the flashlight, in the deep room beneath the silent forest, she read the words an old woman had written, long ago, to a stranger she would never live to meet. I do not know your name. I do not know your face, or your age, or the road that brought you here, but I know something of you, because I built this trail for one kind of soul, and only that kind reaches the end of it. You are patient. You notice the things that others walk past without a glance. You have held tight to something inside yourself through hard days, and you have not let the world take it from you. I know this, because anyone without these things would have stopped long ago. They would have pocketed a single coin and gone home. They would have seen the dark steps and turned back, afraid. They would have stood before this door and not known how to open it. But here you are. That tells me all I need to know. Wren's eyes blurred. She blinked hard and read on. I want you to understand what this is and what it is for. This was gathered slowly over a long life by people who had more than they needed and not always the wisdom to use it well. I will not pretend that the gathering was always kind. It was not. Such things rarely are. But that is mine to carry, not yours. What I ask of you is this. Use what you find here to build something worth the building, not a monument to yourself. Not the easy, empty sort of life that having too much makes possible and meaningless in the very same breath. But something that does what this quiet corner of the world has long needed someone to do. Fill the gaps that the careful, hurried world leaves open behind it. The children who slip through the cracks, the ones with no one at all to speak for them, the small, overlooked places where a little patience and a little attention might change something real. If only they were given the means. You will know what that means better than I ever could have said it. You followed a trail I could only half imagine, to a place I only half designed. You will know what to build. It is yours now. Spend it as though it means something. Wren held the letter to her chest in the cold and the dark, and she let herself be still for a long moment. The kind of stillness that comes only after a thing you have been moving toward, without even knowing it, for the whole of your short life, has finally, quietly arrived. Behind her, Eleanor closed the last of the cases very gently and turned. Child, she said, and her hard old voice had gone soft at its edges. Do you understand what is in this room? Wren shook her head slowly. Not the size of it, she said. Only that it's big. Too big to take in all at once. Eleanor looked at her for a long while. Yes, she said at last. That's about right. They sealed the deep room behind them. They lowered the heavy door back into its bed and brushed the leaves over it once more, and let the forest fold around it again, the way it had folded around everything all this long while. The coins Wren kept. She gathered each one from the lock and knotted them again into the worn handkerchief and held them close, because the old woman's words had been plain. The finder must carry the coins as proof of the passage. They were not only gold now, they were the truth itself, made small enough to hold in two hands. The one thing no careful, hurried, powerful person could ever argue away. The letter she carried against her heart, and the three of them turned and started back through the dark woods toward the distant scattered lights of the sleeping town. They were almost to the tree line when the figure stepped out in front of them. Wren's flashlight caught him. A man, standing between the last of the great trees and the open ground beyond, in a long, dark coat, his face hard to read in the cold beam of light. The same stillness as the pale sedan at the curb. The same patient, waiting watchfulness. He had been watching the edge of these woods, Wren understood all at once, watching for the very thing that was happening now, this very moment. A finder, walking out of the trees with proof of it, gathered in her two small hands. "That doesn't belong to you," the man said. His voice was low, reasonable, the smooth, easy voice of a person long accustomed to being agreed with. "Whatever you found back in there, it belongs to people who have looked after this land a long time. People with the standing to hold it, not a child wandering where she shouldn't be." Wren said nothing. Her hand closed tight around the handkerchief of coins, and before the man could take a single step closer, a small, sharp-shouldered figure moved quietly in front of her. Eleanor. The old woman did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You will want to think very carefully," Eleanor said, "about whatever you mean to say next. Because this child is holding the one thing in all the world that cannot be explained away. And the more you say, standing out here in the dark, trying to frighten a girl, the worse it will look for you when the light finally comes. And the light is coming." The man's eyes moved. From Eleanor, small and unbending before him, to Opal, standing steady at her shoulder, to the small girl behind them both, her chin level, her gaze unflinching, the cold beam of the flashlight trembling only a little in her hand. He looked at the knotted handkerchief she held, and something in his face changed. Because a man who blocks a child's path in the dark woods is not a man who is sure of his own ground. He was not sure. He and the people behind him had counted on the trail going cold, on the coins staying buried, on no finder ever walking out of these trees at all. And someone had walked out. "This isn't finished," the man said. But he stepped aside, and he let them pass. The three of them walked out from under the trees and into the open, into the cold and the wide scattered starlight, and behind them the woods closed dark and quiet, keeping their last great secret sealed safe in the deep room beneath the leaves. Eleanor was the one who understood what had happened to the land. She told it gently in the days that followed, in the back of the warm library, with the maps spread under the lamp. And as Wren listened, the cold of it settled into her slowly. Long ago, when the last of the Hales had gone, a name had quietly slipped out of the books that hold who belongs to what. Slipped, or been helped along. And once a name is gone from the books, the thing it belonged to lies open, forgotten, there for the taking by anyone willing to believe that no one would ever come asking. Someone had believed exactly that. The forgotten land had passed into other hands, been put to other uses, made other people comfortable and rich. All of it resting on a single quiet bet. That the trail would stay cold under the leaves. That a girl would never come walking out of the trees with gold in her hands. Wren thought of the old woman, alone in her forest, pressing coins into the cold ground one at a time, trusting, against all of it, that someday a patient soul would come. They had bet she was wrong. And a girl in a coat with a missing button had just proven, in the dark of the deep woods, how wrong they were. The day they tried to take it from her was a gray one. It happened in a room, a plain room. The kind of room where decisions get made, where adults with quiet voices and careful clothes sit around a long table and speak about a child as though she were a problem to be tidied away, rather than a person sitting right there in the room among them, listening to every word. Wren sat very straight in a chair that was too big for her. Opal sat close on one side of her, Eleanor on the other. And the people across the table spoke. They were not unkind on the surface of things. That was the hardest part of it. They smiled. They chose gentle words, soft words. But beneath the gentle words ran a cold current. And Wren had learned to feel that current long ago. The way a small animal feels a storm gathering long before the first cloud shows. She is only a child, they said. She cannot truly understand what she has gotten herself tangled up in. Surely she has been led into all this by grown-ups with interests of their own. Surely the kindest thing, the wisest thing, would be to set it gently aside, to move the girl somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, just while older, wiser heads sorted out what was real and what was only the daydream of a lonely child. They had answers ready for everything, a smooth, reasonable answer waiting behind every door. And Wren felt the old familiar pull of it, the pull to go small, to go quiet, to fold herself away into a shadow at the end of a long table where nothing more would be asked of her, where she could disappear the way she had spent her whole life learning to disappear. She had answered that pull 1,000 times, but not today. Across the table, one of them leaned forward, the one with the smoothest voice of them all. "It's a lovely story," he said gently. "Coins in the forest, a hidden room, a trail meant just for her, a small, kind smile. But a story is all it is, surely. Where is the proof that any of it belongs to this child?" The room waited, and Wren stood up. She was small. The chair scraped loud against the floor in the silence as she pushed it back and rose. She reached into her coat, and she drew out the worn handkerchief, and she untied the knot, slowly, with steady fingers. And then, one by one, carefully, deliberately, in the deep hush of that plain gray room, she began to lay the coins down on the long table, the bird, the house, the tree, the gate, the river, the key. One after another, she set them down until a line of old gold ran across the dark wood between the girl and the smooth-voiced man. And the gray light from the window slanted down and fell across them. And the little bird on the first coin caught the light, its wings flung wide, still trying, after all these long and silent years, to lift up off the gold and rise. No one spoke. The smooth-voiced man looked at the coins. He looked at the long line of gold, each piece worn soft by the forest, each one matching the next, each one carrying the same quiet marks along its edge that bound them all together into one whole, complete, undeniable thing. He had counted on a child with a story. He had not counted on a child with the proof laid out in her own two hands. And in the silence of that gray room, with the gold catching the pale light, and the little bird straining upward toward a sky it could not reach, something shifted, something turned. The story was no longer only a story. The truth had walked into the room, small and quiet, in a coat with a missing button, and it had set itself down on the table, piece by golden piece, for every last one of them to see. For a long moment, no one in that room spoke. The smooth-voiced man's eyes moved down the line of gold, and the gold gave him nothing to take hold of. He had come ready to argue with a story. He had not come ready to argue with a thing a person could pick up and weigh in the hand and match edge to edge. He had walked into that room holding power. He walked out of it holding very little. Because once the coins lay on the table, the rest came into the light beside them. The careful papers under Eleanor's lamp, the maps drawn out of the glass jars, the will in its leather case, in a hand no one could call a forgery, and the quiet wrong done to a forgotten name long ago in the dark could not stay quiet any longer. It took time. These things move slowly, the way deep water moves, without hurry, without mercy for the impatient. There were rooms and long tables and careful voices. There were weeks that stacked themselves one upon the next like cold gray stones laid in a wall. But the truth, once it had stood up in that first gray room and spread itself out in gold, did not sit back down again. And in the end, it held. In the end, the people who had counted on the trail going cold were made to answer for the bet they had lost, and everything the old woman had gathered and hidden and guarded behind a door that opened for one kind of soul and one kind only, came home to the finder at last. When the number was finally spoken aloud, Wren did not understand it. Not the way a grown person might. It was a vast number, larger than the town, larger than the valley that cradled the town, larger than anything a girl with a missing button had ever held in her two small hands, or in her small, narrow life. Eleanor said it plainly, the way she said everything, without drama and without apology. 380 millions. And then the old woman watched the child's face to see how the weight of it would land. It did not land the way she expected. Wren did not gasp. She did not cry out or laugh or go pale and grip the edge of the table. She sat very still, the way she had once sat at the end of a long table on a forgotten birthday morning, with the gray light coming through the window like it wasn't sure it wanted to be there. And she let the number move through her and out the other side, like cold water through her cupped hands, because the number was not the thing. The number had never been the thing. The thing was a sentence in a letter, written by a woman she would never live to meet. You are patient. You notice what others walk past. The thing was a small wooden bird, worn smooth, and a grandmother's faraway smile, and a voice gone soft, saying from a kind place, from long ago, before all this. The thing was the word together, spoken in a warm library by a woman with half-moon glasses and soft, watchful eyes. The number was only the thing that would let her do something with all of that. And she already knew, sitting in that gray room with the vast figure hanging in the air above the gold, exactly what she meant to do with it. It was Opal who found the last of it, the last pages. The notebook had held more in it than Wren had read, that first day in the dry stone room by the trembling light of a flashlight. She had read enough then to understand. She had not read all the way to the end, and Opal, who had spent a long life among old papers, who knew, the way few people know, that the truest things are so often saved for the very last page. Opal read on. She found Wren one quiet afternoon in the back of the warm library, in the soft light near the shelves, and she set the little leather notebook down on the table between them, open to a page near its close. There's something here, Opal said gently, that you ought to read for yourself, child, with your own eyes. Wren bent her head over the page, and in the old woman's careful hand, fainter here, slower, the letters drawn as though by someone near the end of a long, long road, she read, "People believe I built this trail because I had too much," the old woman had written, "and no one left to give it to. That is the smaller truth. The larger truth is older than that, older than the house and the land, and all the long gathering. There was a time, before any of it, when I was a child no one looked at. A child at the edge of a crowded table. A child who learned to take up no room, because room was a thing she had never been given. Who learned to make no sound, because her sounds were not wanted. Who learned, very early, that the safest thing a small, unwanted person can be in this world is unseen. Wren's breath caught in her chest. She read the lines again, slowly. To be certain, the words were saying what she thought they were saying. They were. I was that child, the old woman had written, before I was anything else at all. And though the years gave me far more than I ever dared to dream of, they never quite took that child away. She was in me still, at the end of everything. She is in me now, even as my hand writes this. And so, when I came at last to ask myself who in all the world deserved what I had gathered, I did not think of the loud ones, or the bold ones, or the ones the world already loved and favored and lifted up. I thought of her, the child at the edge of the table, the one who notices everything and is noticed by no one. I built this trail for her, for whoever she turned out to be, in whatever far-off day she finally came walking into the trees. I could not know her name, but I knew her heart, because it had once been my own. Wren sat very still in the warm library, the old notebook open before her in the soft light, and felt something in her chest break gently open, like river ice giving way, at last, to the spring water moving underneath. The old woman had not chosen a stranger. The old woman had reached back across all those long years, and chosen a girl she already knew without knowing, knew the way you know your own face in dark, still water. Two unseen children, one who had grown old and gathered the whole of the world to herself, and yet had never once stopped being that small girl at the edge of the table, and one who had only just begun her life, a girl with a missing button, and a knotted handkerchief of gold, and a habit of leaving no trace of herself behind. The trail had not been a test after all. Not in the end. It had been a hand, reaching out across all that time, from one lonely child to another. It had been a way of saying to a girl who would not be born for years and years yet, I see you, even now, even before you are here, wherever you are, whoever you turn out to be, I see you. And Wren wept then, quietly, as she did most things, a few slow tears that slipped down and that she did not bother to wipe away. And Opal did not say a word. She simply reached across the table and laid her warm old hand over the girl's small cold one, and let her cry until she was finished. The girl from the house came to find her a few days after. The tall one, Dana, the one who had called her the digger, and made the wide searching gestures across the common room, and asked the others, loud enough to carry, just what the orphan thought she was looking for out there in the dirt like an animal. She knocked on Wren's door, which was a thing she had not done before in all the time the two of them had shared the walls of that house. And when Wren opened it, Dana was standing out in the hallway, and her face held too many things at once for the girl to read it cleanly. "It's you," Dana said. "Isn't it? The one who found all of it. The one the whole town's talking about now." It was not quite a question. Wren waited. "It's you," Dana said again. Softer this time. Wren thought about the searching gestures, the silly noises the younger boy had learned to make whenever she passed by. The poor little thing she had heard once, through a thin kitchen wall, said by a careless mouth that had not meant to wound, and had wounded all the same. She thought about every small, ordinary reminder, stacked up over the long gray years, that she was nobody's first thought. "Yes," she said, "it's me." Dana stood there in the dim hallway. Her mouth worked, and finally, the words came out of her, clumsy and crooked and entirely, painfully real. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the things I said. I didn't think about them. I never think before She stopped herself, started again, from a harder place. "That's not an excuse. I know it's not. I'm sorry." It was not an elegant apology. It was the apology of a girl of 14. Awkward and graceless and true. And Wren understood that it had cost Dana something to stand in that hallway and say it, the way bending costs the proud, the way the first soft word costs the one who has built a whole small kingdom out of being hard. She had expected, if this moment ever came, to feel a kind of satisfaction, a small, cool pleasure at being right, at being proven, at watching the one who had laughed come knocking, at last, with her head bowed. But the satisfaction was not there. What was there instead was something quieter, something more like the absence of a weight she had carried so long she had stopped feeling its shape, like a stone lifted off a sore place you had stopped noticing was sore, and the strange, light ache that floods in after. "It's all right," Wren said, and she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she meant it. Dana blinked. She had braced, plainly, for something else, for coldness, for the door swinging shut in her face, for the long deserved silence of someone who had every right in the world to give it. "You don't have to say that," Dana said. "I know," said Wren. "I'm not saying it because I have to." And that was all of it. But it was enough. Because forgiveness, Wren was learning, slowly, is not a gift you hand to the other person. It is a stone you set down for yourself. The woman who ran the house called her in too. She sat behind her cluttered desk, with the papers and the talk of the town spread around her, and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and on her face was a look the girl had not seen there before. The look of someone who has just learned that something extraordinary had been unfolding right beneath her own roof for weeks and weeks on end, and that she had walked past it every single day without once stopping to look down. She said things that were not quite apologies, but lived in the same neighborhood as them. She said she hoped the girl understood that the house had done what it could, with what it had. That the means had never matched the need, not even close. That if she had only known, if anyone had only known. Wren listened, quietly, the way she listened to most things. And as she listened, she thought about the morning no one had remembered. The thin oatmeal in the chipped bowl, the gray light coming through the window, the circle of red marker on a calendar that somehow had nothing more pressing behind it. Right up until the day it marked came quietly around. "I know," Wren said, and she did know. That was the complicated part of it. The part that a younger, angrier child might have missed. The woman behind the desk was not a cruel person. She was a tired person, stretched too thin across too many small lives, in a place that had been handed far too little to share out among them all. The thinness had not been personal. It had never been about Wren in particular, or about any one child. It had been the shape of the whole arrangement, a thing far larger and far older than one weary woman with a clipboard and a calendar and a telephone that rang too often. And what Wren had found out there in the cold forest was, among so very many things, the means to do something about a thinness like that. A thing one tired woman behind one cluttered desk could not have done alone, however hard she tried, however much she might have wished to. Wren did not say all of that aloud. She was 11, and some understandings live below the level of words, in a quieter place. But she carried it out of that small office with her, gently, the way she carried the little wooden bird in her pocket. The fault had not been one woman's fault, and so the setting right of it would have to be larger than one woman, too. She took her time, deciding what to build. She had learned, by then, that having the means to do a thing is not at all the same as knowing how to do it well. That there is a wide gap between the two. A gap wide enough for a person to fall in and lose herself, if she is not careful. So she was careful. She was patient. Patience, after all, was the thing she knew best in all the world. The one thing the long gray years had given her, free of charge, whether she had wanted it or not, and slowly, with Eleanor watching over the careful, complicated side of things, and Opal sitting steady and warm at her shoulder. A shape began to form out of the patience. She built a home, not a grand one, not a monument with her own name carved deep over the door, the way the old woman had warned her against in the letter. A warm one, a bright one, a place at the edge of a quiet town where children who had slipped through the cracks of the careful, hurried world could come and be fed and be kept warm, and most of all, be seen. A place where the quiet child at the end of the table would be noticed, where a birthday would not be allowed to pass with only a bowl of oatmeal and the indifferent gray morning light, where no small person would have to learn, the hard way, that the safest thing to be is invisible. She built a thing, too, that paired children who had no one at all to speak for them, with grown-ups who knew how to listen, the way Opal had listened, carefully, without rushing her, the way Eleanor had looked at her, that first night, directly and without a single drop of pity, as though she were a person worth understanding all the way down to the bottom. And she gave a quiet gift to the small library in town, a corner of it, a warm corner with soft chairs and good lamps, and shelves of books a child could climb down inside of and disappear into for a whole golden afternoon. She had it named for the old woman, the Cordelia Hale Corner, because the library was where the truest part of the story had begun, where a girl with a single coin in her pocket had been watched over quietly by a woman with half-moon glasses who asked no questions and forgot nothing at all, where, as Wren said softly, The first time the small board of the new home sat down together. The free and open offering of knowledge was the real beginning of every trail worth following. That a child could walk into a quiet room full of books and pull one off a low shelf because something about it caught her eye, and find inside it the very thing that would turn the whole course of a life. The way she had. Her own birthday came around again in time. And this time it was not a gray morning and a bowl of thin oatmeal in a world that held nothing in particular for her. This time there was a cake. Eleanor brought it, of all people. Hard-shouldered, sharp-eyed Eleanor, carrying a cake into the room with the careful, frowning seriousness she brought to everything she did, as though it were a matter of the very gravest importance, to be handled with both hands. Opal was there, her soft eyes shining wet in the candlelight, and Dana sent word. A small, careful message, thought over for days, the way a person thinks over the very first thing they will say after a long, hard silence. Just a few ordinary words, but ordinary words, offered up by someone who is learning, slowly, to do better than they once did, can carry a great deal of weight. It was not like turning a year older in that house. It was a beginning, which is what birthdays are meant to be, and so rarely managed to become. Wren sat among the small handful of people who had come, somehow, against all the odds of her quiet life, to matter to her, and she understood, with a stillness that went all the way down to the soles of her feet, that she was no longer a shadow at the end of a long table. She had been seen, and once a person has truly been seen, even a single time, they carry that seeing inside them, like a small warm coin tucked deep in a pocket, for the rest of their days. On the evening of that birthday, when the cake was gone, and the small gathering had thinned out into the soft dark, Wren walked back out to the edge of the forest, not to the clearing, not to the deep room beneath the leaves, just to the edge, the place where the grass ended and the roots began, the place that had been hers before any of the rest of it had ever been, the place she had come to on a forgotten morning, looking for nothing at all, and found a small glint of gold winking up at her out of the dirt. The light was going soft and golden across the bare branches now, the way it does at the close of a long day, and the air had that gentle, loosening edge to it, the kind that comes when the long cold finally begins to give way and let something warmer through. She stood there for a while, her hands tucked into the pockets of a new coat, a coat that buttoned, all the way up, every button sitting right where it belonged, and she drew out the coin, the last one she had found, the one from the flat rock on the long walk home that very first day, the one she had kept always apart from the others, knotted away on its own, because it was hers in a way the rest of them were not. Proof of something she could not quite find the words for. She turned it slowly in her fingers in the fading golden light. The little bird on its face. Wings flung wide, caught in the moment of lifting off. She traced it with her thumb, the way she had on so many nights in the dark of a crowded room, back when she was small and unseen. And the coin was the one thing in the whole world that had felt like it might have been waiting, just for her. It had been waiting. That was the strange, sure thing she understood now, standing at the edge of the trees with the light gone gold and gentle around her. The trail had waited a lifetime. The coins had waited, patient in the cold, dark ground. The deep room had waited behind its great patient door, and an old woman, bent over a little notebook, had waited too, trusting, across all those long and silent years, that somewhere, someday, a child like the one she had once been would come walking into the trees and look down and keep on looking. The finder the whole trail had waited for had been there all along. She had only needed the time to grow into herself. Opal had given her a photograph not long before, a formal portrait found tucked among the old papers on the local history shelves, an elderly woman, white-haired and straight-backed with sharp, knowing eyes and an expression that was serious but not unkind. On the back, in Opal's careful hand, a few words. "She was watching over you," it said, "longer than either of you ever knew." Wren carried the photograph home that night, to the small, bright place she had at the edge of the quiet town, close enough to the library to walk to on a cold morning, close enough to the tree line that she could see it from her window on the clear days. And she set the photograph on the windowsill, and beside it she set the coin. The old woman who had built the trail with her own 2 hands out of patience and grief and a kind of love that had no name. And the last small piece of gold she had left waiting at the end of it, side by side, in the very last of the evening light. 2 unseen children who had finally found each other across all the long years that lay stacked up between them. The home she built filled in time with children. And one of the strangest, gentlest things that Wren learned in the years that followed was that the finding did not stop with her. There was a boy who came to them, small and watchful and silent, who had already learned far too young to take up no room at all. And one day, in the warm corner of the library that was named for an old woman he would never meet, he pulled a book down off a low shelf because something about its worn spine had caught his eye. And inside it, he found a thing that turned the quiet course of his small life towards something brighter. There was a girl who arrived not speaking a word, who sat down at the edge of every table the way Wren herself had once sat, and who, given a little time and a little patience, and a grown-up who knew how to wait, slowly, slowly began to lift her head. They did not find hidden vaults beneath the forest floor. They did not find trails of gold winding through forbidden woods. What they found was older than gold, and rarer. They found that the small, quiet, overlooked thing inside them, the thing the careless world had walked right past without a second glance, had been worth something all along. They found the trail that runs through every overlooked child, leading not out into the dark woods, but inward, to a value that had been there long before anyone had ever bothered to look for it. And that, Wren thought, watching them from a doorway with the light behind her, that was the true thing the old woman had left behind. Not the number, not the land, not the gold, or the bonds, or the gleaming cases in the deep room beneath the leaves, but this, the quiet, stubborn, unbreakable truth that the smallest person, the one at the very edge of the table, the one no one remembers on a gray birthday morning, is worth seeing, is worth remembering, is worth the building of a whole life around the saving of. Some things, the old woman had written once, near the very end of her little book, you leave in the ground, not because you are finished with them, but because they are complete. Wren understood that now, all the way through. The deep room stayed sealed, out there beneath the leaves, its work in the world already done and finished. The clearing kept its carved post and its faint ghost paths in the grass, and its great patient ring of old trees. And the forest went on being what it had been all along, indifferent and enormous, and somehow, on the right gray morning, large enough to hold one small girl, without minding for a moment that she was small. On the clear evenings, Wren would stand at her window. She would look out toward the distant tree line, going dark against the last of the light, and she would rest her eyes, just for a moment, on the photograph and the coin upon the sill. The old woman's face. The little bird, wings flung wide, caught in the act of rising. And she would think, with a quiet that had long since stopped its aching, that the smallest things are so often the ones that hold the most, that a single coin, glinting up out of the dirt on a forgotten morning, can be the start of a whole new life, that a child no one looked at can grow into someone who teaches a whole town, at last, how to look, and that no one, however small, however quiet, however far out at the cold edge of the table they have been left to sit, is ever truly beyond the reach of being found.